G'day folks and welcome to another episode of Australian UFO Sightings Encounters Down Under. We have Phil Tindale joining us on the show, who is witness to one of Australia's well-known sightings and probably the rarest UFO encounter in the world that you will ever hear of. So please welcome to the show, Mr. Phil Tindale. Welcome to the show there, Phil.
Well, thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me on.
Mate, it's great to have you on. Mate, you have one of the most rarest encounters I think I've ever heard of when it comes to UFOs.
Yeah, look, it is, and I recognise that, which is sort of why I guess I started talking about this. Would you like me to give the listeners a quick intro as to what we saw, and then we can go into some details? Is that sort of the plan?
Absolutely, mate. Just give us a rundown of what you've seen and what happened and such, and yeah, just give us your story, mate.
Yeah. Well, this is 40 years ago, it was a long time ago. There were three witnesses all up, which was myself and my brother, and a third chap called Daryl Brown. My brother and I saw a chase between two UFOs, and Daryl, the other chap, saw a crash. So it was all on the same night, and Daryl lived where the craft disappeared to. So I guess it's the two sightings combined that makes this quite an interesting experience. We had a good view of the chase. We were approximately a kilometre away from it. So, and the chase was sort of at the end of our valley above a tree line. So we just saw these bright lights in the sky, and we saw it from start to finish. So we had a very good view of the chase. And the final move was when one of the craft took off to our right and disappeared behind the hill, and that's where it crashed, which was out the back of Daryl's house. So it's the combination of our experiences or our sightings that sort of gives us a bit of information, really. And there's some interesting details which I'll go into as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But that in itself is like one of those rare encounters for sure. Something you wouldn't see at all when it comes to UFOs. You wouldn't expect to see anyway.
No, I got to say, since I've started reporting this, I've seen a few people have come and contacted me and said that they've also seen chases.
Oh wow!
When I was looking for my own information, I found two other reports that are in conflict, and I'm sort of making an assumption that it's conflict, but it's what it looked like. So that's the best thing I can do, is describe it as the appearance, how it looked. So, I suppose I'll just tell you sort of how it all started. How my brother called me into his room one night because he noticed yellow light bobbing around above the tree line.
Yeah.
And he said, "Phil, come and check this out," because it was hovering there. It wasn't behaving like any ordinary craft, and it would zip back and forth and sort of stay hovering again. So he said, "Come and check this out." And the tree line was probably just under a kilometre away. We lived on sort of perched on the side of the valley, and his room looked up the valley, and it was beyond the tree line was the township of Stirling. In fact, I'll name roads, because if I name some roads, it gives people the opportunity to actually Google it.
Okay.
We lived on a road called Coromandel Road, and along this ridge line, there was a road called Gould Road, Gould, and this is in the district of Stirling in South Australia in the Adelaide Hills. So most of this event happened what looked like it was along Gould Road, sort of just above the tree line, sort of maybe 100 metres above the ground level.
Yep.
And what we could see were bright lights. So we didn't get any detail of the craft. But Daryl, the other chap, he got a close look. So he described it as an 8 metre long yellow speedboat was the words that he used for that.
Yeah, okay.
So, interrupt me if you like, Anthony,
no, that's all right.
Otherwise I'll just regurgitate sort of.
No, that's all right. I should probably send a bit of a reminder out to
really.
Yeah, I'll send a bit of a reminder to our viewers here that if they have any questions, by all means, put them in the comments, and I'll relay the questions to Phil here. So yeah, by all means, guys, get into the questions there if you got anything curious.
Yeah.
Ask away. But yeah, as you were there, Phil.
Please do. Please ask, because it's hard to know Yeah. So Rob calls me into this room, and into his bedroom, and we were 10 years old at the time, so I know we were young, but it doesn't change what I remember. So there was a yellow light doing this weird stuff above the township of Stirling. It was a bit brighter than Venus, so it was the brightest thing in the sky. It was just after sunset, about 9:30, so we'd just gone bed.
Yep.
And it was zipping around, and then it would go, and then it would resume its hover. It was approximately 200 metres in, 1 to 200 metres in from the intersection to Mount Barker Road, again, if you wanted to Google this. And it seemed to be doing something there all itself. Now, it was a clear summer night. There was no noise from this object. It was dead silent. We could usually hear stuff. We could hear cars and stuff winding out this valley. So
Yeah.
any mechanical noises would be very obvious on this sort of night.
Okay, so it's echoing through the valley.
Red craft zoomed in. Yeah, that would be the usual case. We'd hear noises, we'd hear mechanical noises, and so it was dead silent. And its movements were totally unusual. It was zigzagging, and then it would sort of go back to hovering. And this was about 50 meters above the tree line, so it was low. It was low to the ground.
Yep.
It was bright, and it was doing stuff that most craft don't do. Most stuff is much higher than where these objects were.
Yeah. So were these movements like
then the red one came in?
Okay. Sorry, mate. So were these movements sort of like at the blink of an eye kind of speed, or were they like sort of a bit slowish in a sense, but more visible?
No. So they were zigzaggy, where the turns and reversals were quite instant. And in fact, the chase itself was very fast, but it didn't look particularly fast until you recalculated the velocities, which I did later in high school.
Okay.
So yes, it was fast and unusual, but it was not blink of an eye. But the last move, and we'll get to this, when the yellow craft finally took off, that was blink of the eye stuff. That was crazy. The rest of it was quite fast but comprehensible, and I won't say normal, but you could see it clearly. It was all the movements were clear. We could see what was going on. We never lost sight of these craft. So we actually we saw this event from start to finish, where first of all there was the yellow one, the chase happens, and then the yellow one takes off, and all of this took a range. I mean, we were east of this event, and so our east-west perception was not as good as the north-south. In the north-south direction, the total range was probably about 500 meters where these objects zipped backwards and forwards. And we were about a kilometer, just under a kilometer away from that. So you can sort of imagine that the total event probably occupied less than 30 degrees of the horizon. So it's not like we had to twist our heads and look every direction where they were going. They pretty well stayed nicely in the middle of our, where we could see them. So it was
a perfect view.
It was a good position where we were. Yeah, it was perfect view to watch this.
Oh, that's incredible.
So the red one came along and chased the yellow one away. That's pretty well what happened. I can describe. I mean, people have a lot of questions, I'm sure, about whether how do you know it's a chase? How do you know it's hostile? These are the sort of questions that people have often asked me. So I'm sort of preempting. And it's true that I'm sort of imposing my own interpretations, and I'll let other people be the judge of it. But the yellow one was busy doing something. The red one arrived. It zoomed up to the yellow one, reversed up, and zoomed up again. And it struck me because it seemed that the yellow occupants hadn't noticed what the presence of the red craft. That's what it looked like. It seemed that they were taken by surprise.
Wow.
And then as soon as it noticed, it took off. Took off like a rocket, sort of thing.
Yep.
So, that was and that was the start of the chase. And from that point on, the red one was always pursuing the yellow one. So the yellow one was in front, the red one was behind, and they zipped back and forth around the sky. Lots of rolls and tumbles and zigzags, and it was fast. This was fast, but again, not blink of the eye fast. And again, most of the range of this chase happened within a 500-meter sort of zone. So when I reached high school, there were two landmarks that I was aware of. One was the Mount Barker Road, where we could see traffic, which would wind itself up. Now, up the valley, there was no traffic at this time of night, but I knew where the road was in relation to the hill line. And to our right, or to the right slightly, there was a house on the hill, and the light from that house would shine directly at us. And I knew that was about 500 meters up the road from the Mount Barker intersection. So that was the two landmarks that I had to approximate the distance and therefore the speeds that these were doing. So when I reached high school, I worked out, well, it took about 500 meters in about a second. That was my, I mean, it's only a rough estimate, but that was the approximate sort of speed that the time it took to go that distance. So if you work out what velocities that is, well, it calculates to be at 1,800 kilometers an hour, but
Holy
don't
geez.
rely on that too fast. Yeah, it's supersonic, but it may not have been. So I put that in just to make people aware that it was fast and possibly supersonic. And then it would reverse. Then it would bounce off of wherever it turned and reverse. So the accelerations were more impressive than the velocities. The accelerations calculated out to be in the hundreds. I mean, it was at least dozens of G-forces, if not one, into the hundreds of G-forces. It was a bit harder to estimate the acceleration in terms of precision, but it was beyond what anything biological could handle.
Oh,
If gravity wasn't part of the involved, if they use gravity as a form of propulsion, well, perhaps that's how you sustain these accelerations. The accelerations calculated out to be crazy stuff.
Yeah, that is insane. That is an insane amount of speed.
Sorry. Yeah, they were quick. But again, it wasn't blink of the eye, so we could see it move across the horizon, followed by the red one, and zigzag back and forth and whatnot. But Anthony, I'll describe something which I haven't described before, which is, maybe you've seen the video, but I talk about this invisible force that seemed to get used on the yellow one.
Yes, I have heard you mention this.
I'll describe the movements. There was no laser beam. Yeah, you've seen, some people have also seen the video. But throughout this chase, the red one is pursuing the yellow one, and that was for the whole event. That was they were the circumstances. The red one was always chasing the yellow one.
Yeah. And
suddenly, what happens is the chase stops. The yellow one seems to get yanked towards the red one, and to within a few meters of the red one, and then it creeps away to a particular distance, and then gets yanked back again to a few meters again from the red one, and this repeated. So all the autonomy that the yellow craft seemed to have, suddenly seemed to stop, and it seemed to be stuck in this repetitive pattern where it would get sucked to the red one rapidly, wriggle away, and sucked back again. And it was a uniform, repetitive process at about, I'm just guessing again here, approximately 1 second. So it was sort of like a zap, 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 as this craft would wriggle away and get sucked back again. So that was really quite an unusual movement. And my brother at the time, I know this is science fiction language, but he said, "Oh, it's been stuck in a tractor beam," and that was our. It's sort of useful. It sounds crazy, but it's
I was going to say the same thing.
That was our impression.
Yeah, it's sort of like a tractor beam from Star Trek or Star Wars or whichever one it was. Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to think it was to call it, sort of thing.
Well, that's exactly what it looked like, Anthony, and that was my brother's and my own interpretation when this happened.
Yeah, wow,
and
that is
and
incredible.
this repeated for several seconds. Yeah, and I haven't heard of any stories that describe that sort of motion.
No,
Um,
so it sort of makes you think,
so
like,
yeah,
what
I
was the
recognise
red
it.
object trying to do by capturing this object? Or this other craft, I mean.
Well, yeah, Doug, good questions, and it wasn't lethal force. It didn't explode, and I mean, I have actually, because we witnessed this sort of, well, I interpret this as a conflict, and especially since the craft actually crashed in the end. So I interpret this whole engagement as some sort of form of conflict. And
Yeah.
so I've looked for other cases of conflict, and there was one I found, and it was buried somewhere in files. It was on the internet, and I haven't been able to find it again. But it was there was only one that involved something which could be described as lethal force. So I mean, I got to say, nobody wants to hear about aliens involved in conflict because it doesn't bode very well for humanity
No, it'd
if
be very scary.
conflict still exists at the alien level. But my belief is that that lethal force is not common, and many aliens seem even more benevolent than the ones that Rob and I witnessed.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm trying to reassure anyone, but yeah, it's nobody really wants to hear about bad aliens.
No, because we'll be at a massive
So
disadvantage if they
this,
were to, like, sort of come at us.
oh yeah, well yeah, I don't know. I mean, and to be honest, if they had, I suppose, some sort of intention using weapons to control us, it would have been done and dusted decades ago. So I don't think
Yeah,
that's
that's a fair
any
point
part of
too.
any plan.
So, well, just in
Yeah.
regards to that red object, like,
So
how did
this
you see that come
well,
in?
oh, well, it just sort of seemed to zip in from above. So we we were focused on the yellow, weren't paying attention where it actually came from.
Okay.
We were looking out the window, and it just seemed to come straight down from above, but it might have come in from a side or whatnot. We were too focused on this yellow object to see where the red one had entered our field of view from, really.
Yeah, fair
But
enough.
we noticed it coming. It came from a higher position and then zoomed up to the yellow one. And this tractor beam event, I can't recall whether it happened more than once or whether it was used multiple times. It lasted several seconds with this repetitive sort of zap zap as it pulled the yellow craft towards it, and it wriggled away. And they were brutal movements. This was quite brutal. If you were in that yellow craft, you would imagine you'd be shaking around like a sort of ping pong ball.
Oh, yeah.
But once that stopped, the chase resumed. Um, and so the yellow one seemed to get away. It seemed to, I don't know whether the force was released or whether it managed to escape. Whatever had happened, it went back to the chase that we'd first witnessed, and the chase continued with the tumbling and rolling and zigzagging, and how it was before this sort of little tractor beam event happened.
Yeah, okay.
So
Wow.
it's that was the interesting part. Um, Now, the end of the event, of course, I mean, we could go back and dig some deeper holes in all of this, but eventually the yellow one took off to the right, and it followed the ridge line, so it followed Gould Road to a point where we couldn't see it anymore. There was some sort of hill. There was vegetation and stuff to our right that blocked our view of the end of Gould Road, so we could see the southern end, but not the northern end.
Yep.
And so it disappeared behind the trees following the line of Gould Road. And I'm not sure how much detail I should give to show where Daryl lives, because I wouldn't want people visiting him. But he ultimately lived. So at the end of Gould Road, there's a big cutting made by the freeway. And my guess was that when I saw the report in the paper that this object had crashed, so after this chase ended, that was the end of the story for Robert and I. We just thought, oh well, that was interesting, but it wasn't until 2 days later that we read in the paper that somebody else had seen a crash on the same night, same time. And this chap lived across the freeway on the other side of opposite where Gould Road was. It wasn't directly opposite, but it was certainly very close to where I would have expected the yellow craft to crash. If that's where it had crashed, then
yep.
it made perfect sense for Daryl to live in that location. And so what happened was we went about, next day at school, we talked about this and all the rest of it. Nobody seemed to care. The parents, so during this event, you probably noticed, we had enough time to run into the parents' room and trying to get them out of bed. But they perhaps didn't believe us and they told us to go back to sleep. So we went back to watch this. So we had several minutes, and my best guess from start to finish was about maybe 15 minutes in all. So it was quite a long time. But, you know, I guess kids don't believe, most people don't believe kids' stories, and we didn't get a great reception about telling other people at school, so we just let it all go.
No, plus it's pretty common for parents
Saturday,
to sort of like just turn around and go, nah, that's you're imagining things, you know, go back to sleep, you're dreaming or whatever. Parents are too tired and just want to go to sleep or go back to sleep, you know.
Yeah.
It's a common thing.
Yeah, and that was pretty well exactly it, Anthony. That's how they responded to us, and we weren't about to waste lots of time nagging them. We were far too interested in.
Oh yeah, you had a bloody massive show going on.
Well, that's right, and it was interesting. As kids, we knew this wasn't we knew it wasn't normal. We knew this was something different, so it was worth watching. So we just went back and watched this chase continue. But when the yellow one disappeared, we waited probably, and then that was a blink of the eye. So this, when it took off to the right, it seemed to have enough of being chased or decide on a different tactic, whatever it was, and it hit the go pedal and zoomed up the crest of that hill, followed the crest of that hill along Gould Road, and disappeared. But that was incredible speed. That was something that it was blink of the eye stuff. It looked totally impossible. It happened so quickly. And the red one, at that time, we don't even know what happened to the red one, whether the red one followed or just disappeared or zoomed off in another direction. It was like we saw the yellow one just boof up there, and then the event was over. And that was that. That was like the yellow one gone, and we don't know whether it followed or disappeared. So we waited for about an hour. I'm just estimating here because as a kid, hard to know how long we spent, but it was a long time. We sat there and waited and waited and waited and, hoped that something would come back, but nothing came back. But 2 days later on the Saturday, so this event happened on a Thursday night, and then on Saturday, we went to visit our grandmother, and our grandmother had seen this report on the Saturday paper that described another chap who he heard a loud crash, and so he came running out, and this chap lived in Stirling. He'd come running out. The dogs had gone running inside. They were terrified. I can see you've got a picture of the tree up on the screen now. So yes, that was the tree that it ran into.
Yeah, wow, that's a massive tree.
So Daryl ran out. Yeah, it is. It was a huge tree, and I mean, as upsetting as it was, the new owners of the property cut it down, along with about 3 or 4 others, probably about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And that's another story. I went in and I scolded them for, because I went and door knocked, told them the story. They thought I was crazy, but you can see the size of the tree, and there was still damage visible up in the top of that tree.
Yeah, wow.
So Daryl heard this crash and he ran outside, and the dogs went running in. And at that time, the craft was no longer illuminated. So when we were watching it, it just glowed this yellow colour. And my impression was it was actually the skin of the craft that was glowing, not a light. And I'll explain why I think that's the case. But when Daryl saw it, there was no light at all. It was dark, and he shone the torch up into the tree. You could see this yellow object, wedged in the tree about 8 meters across. And it freaked him out, and he ran back inside and called the police. And I don't think he actually went back out again because he was too scared to, in case something happened, he didn't know what was going on.
Oh, as you would.
But when the police were, yeah, I mean, it's, so he could hear it creaking and groaning. The tree was creaking and groaning under the weight of the craft, which is why he pointed the torch into the tree, because it was, making a noise. And when the police got there, of course, the craft had disappeared. So I suspect it took off and just left the tree as some sort of evidence that something had happened. But to any skeptic, there's no way they're going to believe Daryl. And poor old Daryl, he never knew that my brother and I had seen the chase that led up to the crash. I've spoken to 4 members of his family, his 2 brothers, his ex-wife, and a sister-in-law, and they all told me that it had affected him significantly because it pretty well changed his perspective on, well, lots of things, reality.
Yeah, it would definitely shake you up and sort of open your eyes a little bit, wouldn't
it? Yeah, and it seemed to affect. They commented on that and said that it did. That it was a real shame that my brother and I hadn't started looking. Well, I was generally. My brother actually doesn't want to do this. He sort of said, "You're on your own, buddy."
Oh, that sucks.
He'll back me up, but he's not going to go public by himself.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, the stigma, Anthony. Anybody into UFOs gets ridiculed. So it's
especially if they're in a high position.
Yeah, and Rob's. I'm self-employed, but my brother works as a professional, and he's not interested in any bad publicity, I guess.
Yeah, especially back in those days too. Yeah. You got frowned upon and shunned out of the public pretty much. You were pretty much called the crazy person of the town. When it comes to anything paranormal, even UFO related, it's such a shame that it was like that back in those days.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, Rob and I, nobody had any interest in it. And that was my interpretation, but it was probably they just didn't believe us, so they'd sort of nod their head and say, "Oh, that's interesting," and back to something else that's more relevant. So that, and same with our parents, of course, they sort of had a total lack of interest, or appeared to have a total lack of interest. Mind you, when my grandmother pulled out the paper, their interest picked up a lot. They thought, "Oh, heck, we should have got out of bed."
Yep, the moment of regret.
Yeah, it was. And it was a moment of sort of vindication for my brother and I, because it was like, well, this chap saw it as well, so you can't say we were making it up now. But there was such a lackluster response that as kids, it was very easy for us to just let it go and put it into the bin of, campfire stories. And that was pretty well where it stood for 30 or more years. Both my brother and I would talk about it when the opportunity arose at a pub or a campfire, or some sort of paranormal story. But apart from that, neither Rob or myself had any perspective on the UFO phenomena at all. The internet wasn't invented, so we couldn't Google to see how many other people had seen UFOs. I had never bought a book on UFOs, so it was just, there was no perspective on the UFO topic whatsoever for us.
Yeah, well, so what, even the local libraries didn't have anything in general for UFOs back then?
And look, it's possible, but again, we didn't really look because people weren't interested, and so I wasn't. My own belief and my brother's belief is, we're being visited. I mean, that's what it most likely looked like. Except, so what was the sort of, so what? There was no sort of, we hadn't worked through the consequences or the implications of what this really means. But I mean, now, as you know, Anthony, you've sort of dived into the UFO field, and you can see, and goodness that people have, like yourself, Anthony, because it provides a platform where we can share our stories.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. That's pretty much
and
what
I
we're
was,
aiming for.
yeah, yeah, and it's valuable because I was blown away at how many other people had um, described stuff, particularly the movements of these craft, how they sort of do this zigzag, um, and seem not to have any inertia. So that was, and that sort of, when I started seeing these other stories that people would describe similar stuff, I thought, these guys aren't making it up. They're describing exactly what I saw. Um, and so I realized that this is a global phenomenon.
Yeah, which is incredible.
And we need to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the fact that they've seen the same things, pretty much what you've seen, well, being witness to a UFO battle, if you were to call it that, that's incredible. It's very
Yeah,
rare. It's like most people will just see like a single UFO, like a bright light in the sky, or might see a weird shaped object in the sky or something like that. But this is two UFOs battling it out in some weird way.
yeah. And so there's very few reports of this sort of conflict. There was one in Russia which I came across again while I was trying to find an old copy of my own report. Um, and a whole township saw 5 UFOs chasing one, and they described something like a laser beam that came out of these 5, and it was aimed at the craft they were trying to get. When that craft got hit, it would lose power. So that was an interesting, one of
Wow.
the more interesting documented cases. Um, and the
Yeah.
South African one was where um, I think, and again, a large number of people witnessed 3 objects chasing one. And the description was, like if I can remember, it lasted for 59 minutes, and then all 3 objects exploded into dust. So those were the 2 other UFO conflict stories that I came across while I was trying to find my own story. So I knew my own story was out there, the one that Daryl had reported in the Advertiser. But
Yep.
of course, we didn't have any copies. So 30 years later, I wanted to re-dig this story up. So I had to find Daryl. I had to find the old newspaper clipping. So that was the sort of beginning of me putting my own experience into perspective. Really, that's how this whole process evolved.
Yeah, well, you've
Um,
done well there, mate, because you've opened up a bit of a can of worms there with that one there, and started helping people or encouraging people to come up with their encounters as well.
yeah, yeah. And what I've started to do in my own friend group, and I don't necessarily encourage this because um, it leads to social distancing. I mean, that's how I can describe it. But I've asked pretty well everyone within my circle of friends and acquaintances, and just sort of even people who I just know they're friends of friends, but don't have a particular relationship or anything with them. I've asked them whether they see UFOs because
Yep.
I'm interested in the statistics. How big is this phenomenon? If I've seen it and other people are reporting it, how big is it? And I've asked about 300 people within my own friend groups, and they're not into UFOs at all. And of those 300 people, I'd say I'd have somewhere between 20 and 30 people who have described something that cannot be written off as conventional craft or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
it includes abductions. There's people that
Oh.
I know who claim that they've had abduction and contact. And I personally haven't. This is the experience that I've just described to you, Anthony, is my only UFO experience. So I have
Yep.
everything else that I understand is through literature and through speaking with people, and not on it's not a personal experience.
No, that's fair enough.
Um, but the point of my investigation was I seemed to prove that the statistics where sort of 1 in 20 people or approximately have seen a UFO, and I think it's about 1 in 200 claim that have had contact. They are the statistics that I discovered through on some of the social media sites, and that seems about right. That seems to be about the correct statistic. Mine was slightly more, but it doesn't. There's plenty of errors when you've got small samples, so that's how that goes.
Yeah, that's fair enough too. Did any of your friends
So
seem
that
to mistake objects at all? Like they could have said they've seen a craft or something like that, but they could have mistaken it for something that had a bit more critical background to it, maybe like a bit of a more logical sort of.
Um, yeah, there were plenty of those, but I excluded them from the sort of the numbers that I just mentioned. Now the ones that I mean, I'll give you the numbers. I had 3 people who said that they had this white glowing object travel beside them in the car. It stopped their car, um, and and one of those people claims to have an abduction event. They had missing time.
Yep. Okay.
I had 2 people who've had craft that landed in a paddock or relatively close encounters sort of stuff.
Yep.
I had 3 people who I spoke to who had described some sort of contact or abduction event. And there were lots that described satellites, or there was more that described satellites that zigzagged and turned, and that sort of unmistakable type movement that some of these UFOs do.
Yep.
So they weren't airplanes. You could say potentially they were really high altitude drones, but we're talking years ago, before drones were really invented. So most of my friend group are older. And so these were sort of, some of the farmers that lived next to me, and friends, fathers of friends and stuff like that.
Yep. Yep.
So
no, that's fair enough. So mostly there's all unmistakable UFOs that can't be accounted for, or anything that's such a logical explanation to them.
Yeah, so these people really just sort of crystallised that the statistics. I mean, whether the stats were right or wrong, it certainly demonstrated that the UFO phenomena has been well witnessed globally, and there's enough. It doesn't take a great deal of effort to do a population sample and see how many people have seen it. So it sort of leads to the conclusion that this is certainly a global phenomena, and that it's large scale, and there's obviously something going on that we should be talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's about time the media and everyone starts speaking about these sort of things. Like it's only just sort of start coming out now with America, with the To the Stars Academy sort of opening up about that. Or they actually managed to get some of the military encounters out, which is about time, what I think. And it's sort of
Yes.
it is sort of opening up a bit of a can of worms there, but I feel it's a bit too slow. Like I think it was 2016 or 2017 when the Nimitz encounter got released, and then we haven't had another one for another 3 or 4 years there, till recently when they had that pilot take a photo of an object in the sky, which is a photo of a photo, and that was taken with an iPhone apparently. I don't know if that's the camera that took the photo of the photo was an iPhone or not, but whatever that pilot was using, it was absolutely high quality. But still couldn't get a grasp on what that object was. But obviously the stories behind it is hard to sort of be too critical on it, because the military have their reports they have to do, and they're not going to go on bullshit about it. So no, go on.
Oh, sorry, Anthony. I was just going to say the disclosure is taking much longer than anyone who's had a personal experience wants this to be out and about, people to talk about it. But it's taking much longer than any of us would want it to be. I suppose they need to be a bit careful with, freaking people out who simply, have never even considered the UFO topic as real. So, but that's I'm looking forward to the day where we can talk about this without this crazy judgment and skepticism that people sort of throw at you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's going to be massive relief off people's shoulders there. The ones that have had the encounters and have been desperately trying to explain to everyone that I've had this experience, this encounter. This stuff has happened to me. I've witnessed this and that. And then for finally have disclosure there, and they go, oh, maybe they weren't talking shit, basically.
Well, that's right. That's right. Suddenly you think, well, perhaps that, and in fact, I mean, again, other statistics seem to suggest that, most people aren't fibbing. I mean, the difficulty is people's interpretation, whether their interpretation is correct. But most people aren't just making rubbish up. I mean,
No,
there
that's
is a
right.
small percentage of people do, but yeah, no, it seems like it's the liars are not the problem in this UFO field. It's an interpretation issue and a misidentification issue, if
That's
anything.
right. Yeah, there's a massive amount of misidentifications there, but because a lot of people they sort of just want to go and throw out the alien card, saying, "Oh, I saw an alien craft there," but instead of going for the critical thinking first and going, "Hang on, what could it have been? Could it have been a plane, a star, or a satellite, a planet, something like that." Like they just want to go and jump straight to the alien card,
Yeah,
which takes away a lot of the credibility of people's
yeah,
legitimate sort of sightings, and that's what the people need to start doing. They need to start
yeah,
becoming a bit more critical on what they're looking at. There's a lot of things to go and take into account for these sort of things instead of just jumping to that alien
yeah,
card. So, but yeah, look, it is great that the disclosure is coming. It's finally, oh, eventually coming, I suppose. But I think Trump there had that what was it? Had the bill there to go on 180 days or so to go and get some sort of disclosure out there. So we'll see how that comes out, I
yeah.
suppose.
So it's not likely to get squeezed back into the bag. I think this will eventually come out. Oh, look, Anthony, I'll tell you a little bit about why I think the skin of the craft glows. Is that sort of interesting to you?
Absolutely, mate. There's one of the questions I was going to actually ask you, but you got carried away. But by all means, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We started dribbling about stuff, but yeah. Look, so with this chase that was going on, um, there was lots of dodging, duck diving, and weaving in zigzags, and the luminosity of both the red one and the yellow one didn't change. So if it was a mounted light, you would expect some sort of flicker that you would see, like on helicopters and planes when they turn their direction.
Yeah.
Of course, the light dims and changes as well. And these craft were doing a heck of a lot of zigzagging and turning. And yet the sort of impression was quite an unusual two-dimensional type impression. So the luminosity stayed the same through the entire event. The luminosity of both the crafts stayed the same. So that was my sort of like, it had quite an unusual two-dimensional effect about it. And so that's why I think the skin of the craft were actually glowing. And of course Daryl's report where he described the yellow one as having yellow skin, and from what Rob and I saw was sort of a bright yellow light, sort of a bit brighter than your street lights, something
Yep.
where it's got a slight yellow tinge to it. So that was my impression as to why the skin of the craft was glowing. And of course, there's interpretation; it could be incorrect, but that's certainly how it looked to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So did it look like the objects were actually casting light, or was it just a bit of just a glow on itself?
No, they were very bright, so they were illuminated. They were brightly illuminated.
Yeah, but were they illuminating
So
the environment around them?
not from our distance, and not so it's. I mean, it might have been different if you were directly under it, but we were at quite a distance. So it was just under a kilometre from when I sort of did a line on the map,
Yep.
but it didn't seem to illuminate anything else. So it was
Yeah.
just
Okay.
no, it was just the optics that we could see. Yeah,
Yep.
and they were. I mean, so we couldn't see any detail of these craft. They were just bright lights. It was Daryl who got the close look, who could say that it sort of appeared like a speedboat shape,
Yeah.
about 8 meters long. And I mean, I envy him for having such a close look. But
Oh, wouldn't we
all
all?
I mean, yeah, yeah, and you can't have the best of both worlds. If we were any closer, we wouldn't have had such a good view of the chase, because
No, that is true. That's true.
Yeah.
So he
So
didn't
it
really
worked
take
out.
notice of the object in the tree at the time, did he? Until he's trying to torch up there by hearing the noise. He didn't see it like sort of
That's right.
at the corner of his eye or anything like that. No.
No, well, he was inside and he heard a loud crash,
That's right.
and
Yep.
so he ran outside. It was a calm, still, dead quiet night, and so he thought, "What the heck's that? Maybe something's crashed on the freeway or something like that." So he ran outside to see what had happened. And the dogs, he had two big Great Danes. That's the picture of one of them there. They ran inside. They were quite scared by whatever was outside. He was also babysitting two children as well, and I I wonder whether these kids remember any of this or not. But when he ran outside, he could hear this creaking and groaning coming from a pine tree that was out the back of his cottage that he lived. And so he thought, what's that unusual noise? And he shined the torch up into the tree, and he saw this object stuck in it. And that was his close encounter. So he would have been probably 30 meters from the underside of that object, 20 to 30 meters, I would say.
Did he describe what sort of noise it was making?
Just like breaking branches, something squeak. It was like squeaking and rubbing on the tree. So
okay, so it could have just been the tree under stress, sort of thing.
Yeah, like it was groaning under some weight, and the branches and limbs themselves were sort of creaking and cracking. So that's what Daryl heard.
Yeah,
and,
wow.
It's a pity it's a pity we didn't have the camera sort of technology that we've got today. And it's a pity the police didn't arrive earlier.
Yeah.
Because somebody else might have seen it then.
Oh, look, honestly, I think if we did have the technology back then, we'll still get a blurry picture.
Yeah, and someone, the trouble is also you can still fake technology. People are great at Photoshop these days.
Oh, aren't they what? Yeah, it's just a shame though. Like, every time someone tries to capture a legitimate UFO, it's just always in blur. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Like given like the kind of cameras we have now these days, like with brilliant pictures, we still can't seem to capture a damn UFO.
No, and if it was clear, people would probably say it was fake.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That takes away a lot of the credibility as well. So, which is a shame, really. If they didn't do so many fake videos on the internet, there we'd probably be able to go and decipher the ones between the real ones and the fake ones. But like you're saying, technology these days is getting too good. It's hard to decipher between the fake ones and real ones, unfortunately.
Well, it is, and so I put a lot more emphasis in the witness testimony, especially if there's multiple witnesses. This is my own research project. Like I say, I didn't used to be interested in UFOs, but in the last 5 or 6 years, I've sort of realised how important the conversation is. So, hence, I'm talking about it these days.
Yeah, no, that's great that you are, because you're definitely putting forward your encounter there, which will hopefully encourage others to go and bring theirs forward as well. Which is absolutely a fantastic job, mate. You're doing an absolute fantastic job there, bringing it out.
Well, thanks, Anthony, and I appreciate you supplying the platform to be able to do this sort of stuff on.
No, by all means, mate. This is what we're here for. We want this disclosure sort of thing. The more detail, the better.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, before we start the end of the show, mate, is there anything else you want to sort of add to this?
No, I think I've covered most of the aspects that I can recall. So I hope it encourages the conversation, because that's the goal of this. Yeah,
no worries, mate. That's all good. But mate, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here, mate. I hope other people now understand your encounter that you've had, if they haven't already known about your encounter. So hopefully they get a bit of a broad perspective of what does go around, and that there are actually UFOs having a good old battle in the backyards of people's homes.
Yeah, well, that's right. And then thank you again for having me on, Anthony. I appreciate it.
No worries, mate. You have a good one, mate.